Many of us know about the story of Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding at Cana. And we know that, it shows Jesus is powerful and he can do miracles. And I'm right there with you. It does show that. But this miracle has some deeper meanings, and it's very significant in seeing what Jesus ultimately was going to go on to do in the rest of his ministry. And so we're going to look at some of the deeper meanings that you might not get at first glance with this story, but it's a really incredible story, and there's a lot to get into. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to get right into it, and we're going to read through the text, kind of verse by verse. We're going to go through it, and I'll point out some observations that you guys can take with you. And I do have to give credit to Professor Matt Williams, who I'm taking a lot of this from him. And so he does a great job explaining this if you want to go see his work. So in John 2, we have the wedding at Cana. And so let's read a few verses and we'll start talking about it. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Okay, so when we stop right there, in our minds, that's, kind of a normal thing, whatever. Like, they ran out of wine. What are you going to do about it? But in their culture, that was not normal. These weddings were huge. Some of them would last a week. There were feasts, there was partying. Families would go into debt in order to provide enough food and wine for their guests. And so this was not a normal occurrence. And it kind of shows that this probably was a poor family, because they literally could not provide enough wine with their greatest efforts. And so they ran out. And this is a big deal because in that culture, it's shame and honor. This was a feast. It was a public event. You better have enough wine. You better have enough food for everybody. And they didn't. And so that would bring shame on their family for a long time to come. And so this would be a big deal for that family of that's why they're kind of panicking here. And Jesus' mother kind of says to him, like, let's do something about this. And we don't know exactly why she said that, but it's a concern. And so this family is facing shame. And so that's the setup right here is, okay, we got a poor family. It's going to bring about shame on them. And so let's see what Jesus does. Keep reading in verse 6. Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with the water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed him. So at the end there, we see this is Jesus' first sign. Why is this his first sign? Well, we're going to see this is going to foreshadow the rest of his work. And so right there in verse 6, we see that these water jars, what are they used for? They're used for the Jewish rites of purification. Now, what's that mean? It means that in this time, the Jewish people in the first century, they would go to these jars of water to get clean. They would go there, wash their hands, and become ceremonially clean in order to go and eat. And this was part of their old covenant kind of traditions and laws, right? And so these waters are they're how you would get clean. And so you would go to these waters and get clean. That's part of the old covenant. And so what is Jesus doing here? He transformed them from water to wine. So when you would go to these jars of water to get clean, now what would happen? What would happen? You would go and there was no water. So how would you get clean? Well, it was no longer going to be by this water. And so Jesus by doing this, from transforming water to wine, is he's saying this old covenant is being transformed. And so no longer would you go to these jars of water to get clean. And so where are you going to go to get clean? Well, that's kind of John's question here. And so it's significant that it turns into wine. And not just a little wine, but a lot of wine, right? It says 6 jars filled with 20 to 30 gallons. Okay, that's either 120 to 180 gallons of wine. It's a lot. And so there's prophecies that connect wine to the new covenant, or the covenant that Jesus was going to establish. In Amos chapter 9, verses 11 through 13, read this. In that day, I'll raise up the booth of David that has fallen, and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom, and all the nations who are called by my name, declares the Lord who does this. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him who sows the seed. The mountains shall drip sweet wine, and all the hills shall flow with it. So that sounds like a lot of wine, and it's associated with this restoration of the house of David. Now again, Jesus is the son of David, right? He's restoring the house of David, and he's showing this by transforming the old covenant water into wine. And not only that, but it says the hills shall flow with it, right? That's the abundance. And it says the mountains shall drip sweet wine. Okay, it sounds like good wine. And that's exactly what we see at the wedding. The man takes the wine, and he's like, oh my goodness, this is the best wine. He's like, you guys save this for the end. No one does that. And so this wine there was a lot of wine, and it was the best wine. And so that's fitting our Old Testament expectations for the new covenant. And so you can look at Jeremiah 31 as well. I would suggest you read the whole passage, though we're not going to do that now, but this is kind of a classic passage for the new covenant. And in verse 12, it says, talking about the new covenant, they shall come and sing aloud on the height of Zion, and they shall be radiant over the goodness of the Lord, over the grain, the wine, and the oil, etc. So wine is looped in with these kind of things that'll be in abundance, and you'll rejoice over these things when the new covenant comes. So there's a couple of verses there, and it's showing the expectation of the new covenant. And Jesus is bringing that in, not only by just giving a lot of wine here. He's not just doing that, but he's taking the old covenant way of getting clean in their minds and transforming it to the new covenant. And so the question then becomes, how do you get clean? And ultimately, John's gospel will tell it to us, right? We continue reading, and we see that, Nicodemus, right? He needs to be clean as well. And that leaves the question of, okay, this amazing Jewish teacher who's followed the law, if he needs to get clean, okay, still, we have this question of how do we get clean? And ultimately, when we get to the Samaritan woman, we see that Jesus is the living water, right? And so John has this progression in his gospel where it starts here, and you pose this question, how do I get clean? And then Nicodemus, this really good man, right, who relies on his good works, right? Many of us do that. We rely on our good works to save us. And ultimately, John says, no, that's not how you get clean. It's not just doing good works. When you get to the Samaritan woman, this sinner, well, obviously she needs to get clean, right? But how does she get clean? How could a sinner like her get clean? Jesus, who is the living water, he is who can cleanse her and anybody else, anybody watching this video. And so we don't rely on our good works, but we rely on Jesus, who is the living water. And so this new covenant is the transformation, the fulfilling of the old covenant. And so Jesus, when he dies and resurrects, he does that for our sins to cleanse us. And so this new covenant says when anybody puts their faith in Jesus, they are given the Holy Spirit, right? The Spirit of God, who transforms them and renews them into a new life. And this is the good news of this miracle. The old covenant way is being renewed and fulfilled in Jesus so that we can freely come have faith and receive his Spirit. Every person who believes in him can be cleansed. And so that kind of goes along with Okay, now the family, right? We mentioned in the beginning, the family was facing shame. They were going to get a lot of shame for running out of wine at this wedding. And so when Jesus comes in, not only does he give them a ton of wine, but my goodness, he gives them the best wine, to now where they were facing this kind of shame of, oh, we ran out of water, or we ran out of wine. We weren't going to be able to serve these people, to now the people are talking about how great the wine is. So think about that. They go from shame to honor, from shame to honor. And ultimately, we talked about the work of Jesus on the cross. That's what he does. He takes our shame and the wrath that we deserve for our sin on the cross. He takes that and he gives us his honor that he has, right? He gives that to us, his righteousness, his honor, to where we go from shame to honor, seated at the right hand of Christ, as Ephesians says. And so this story is, yes, we can see the power of Jesus, that he did this miracle, but ultimately this miracle has a deeper meaning and a foreshadowing of the great work that Jesus will do for us. And so if you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe. I'm thinking of doing some more videos on some of the stories of the Gospel of John, so be on the lookout for that. But anyways, I hope that helped, and I hope that deepens your understanding of this story. May you have a blessed week, and go in peace.